We've all had those moments, right? When someone just really gets under your skin, does something that makes you want to scream or hold a grudge forever,
Yeah.
makes you wonder, how do we deal with those really deep hurts?
It's tough.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about this the other day,
Mm.
and I came across this interesting exercise. Just imagine like you're writing your name on a piece of paper and then erasing it,
Yeah.
writing again,
Mm.
erasing it again.
Mm.
How long would you keep doing that?
Yeah. How long before you get tired of it?
Exactly. It's kind of a weird thing to think about, isn't it? Like, why would we even bother?
Right.
But it's actually a really good way to illustrate this idea of unconditional forgiveness,
Okay.
which is what we're going to be diving into today.
Awesome.
We're going to be trying to understand, like, what does unconditional forgiveness really mean?
Mm.
And why is it so important?
Yeah.
And we're going to be looking at a couple of sources for this. We're going to be looking at a passage from the Bible and also a really powerful quote from Joyce Meyer.
I love Joyce Meyer.
Yeah. But first, back to that name writing thing.
Mm-hmm.
The person who shared this with me said they quit after a few times. And not because their hand was tired or anything, but because they wanted to know what the point was.
Yeah, I get that.
Right. What's the point of just writing and erasing?
Yeah.
So their friend explained it like this. God is like the eraser. He keeps wiping the slate clean, constantly forgiving us. Even when we keep making the same mistakes, he never gets tired of forgiving.
Wow. That's such a powerful image. And it really highlights like the difference between how we as humans often approach forgiveness versus this idea of like divine forgiveness.
It's true. We tend to want explanations, apologies,
Mm-hmm.
guarantees that the person won't hurt us again
Yeah.
before we even think about forgiving.
Right. Exactly. It's like we put all these conditions on our forgiveness. And honestly, that often hurts us more than the person we're holding a grudge against.
Yeah.
It's like Joyce Meyer said, refusing to forgive is like drinking poison and sitting back and waiting for your enemy to die.
Wow. That is a powerful quote.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about the damage we inflict on ourselves when we refuse to let go.
Absolutely. Holding on to anger and resentment, it just keeps us tied to that hurt.
So if unconditional forgiveness is better for us, then what does that even look like?
Right.
How do you just let go when someone does something that really hurts?
Yeah.
It can't be as simple as just saying you forgive them, right?
No, it's not.
There's that well-known passage in the Bible, Matthew 18:21-22. It's where Peter asks Jesus how many times he should forgive his brother. And Jesus answers with 70 times 7.
Right. And a lot of people take that literally. But what it really means is an unlimited number of times. Forgiveness shouldn't have a limit.
So how do we as humans learn to forgive without keeping score or setting limits? Like, how do we actually do that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's definitely not easy.
Yeah.
But I think the key is to remember that forgiveness is ultimately for our own benefit.
Okay.
It's about releasing ourselves from the burden of carrying around that negativity.
Okay. That makes sense in theory.
Right.
But in reality, how do we get to that point?
Mm-hmm.
What are some practical steps we can take to move towards unconditional forgiveness, especially when it feels impossible?
Well, the first step is being willing to forgive without needing an apology or justification. It's not about condoning the other person's actions.
Right.
It's about choosing to release the pain that their actions have caused you.
So it's more about freeing ourselves from the hurt
Yeah.
than it is about the other person then.
Exactly. It's an internal process, a shift in perspective. Something else that can be incredibly powerful is trying to understand the other person's perspective.
Okay.
Now, I'm not saying you have to agree with their actions, but trying to see things from their point of view can soften your anger.
That's a tough one, I have to admit.
Mm-hmm.
But I can see how it might be helpful in shifting that internal perspective you mentioned.
It can be tough, but it's so powerful. And don't forget, everyone makes mistakes. We've all needed forgiveness at some point in our lives. Recognizing that shared human experience can make it easier to extend that same grace to others.
That's a good reminder. Thinking about times I've needed forgiveness definitely makes it easier to think about forgiving others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And lastly, I think it's so important to let go of the desire for revenge or validation.
Yeah.
This isn't about them. It's about your peace of mind. It's about your freedom.
So how does this play out in real-life situations, though? What if someone keeps hurting you, even after you've forgiven them? Or what if they aren't even sorry for what they did? How can we apply this unconditional forgiveness then?
Those are great questions, and ones I hear all the time.
Yeah.
Forgiveness, especially unconditional forgiveness, isn't about giving someone a free pass to keep hurting you. It's more about taking back your power.
Taking back my power. That's an interesting way to put it. How does forgiving someone take back my power?
Well, when we hold on to anger and resentment, we're letting the person who hurt us live rent-free in our minds.
Hmm.
Unconditional forgiveness is about reclaiming that mental and emotional space.
Oh, so it's about shifting our focus away from them and back to ourselves.
Exactly. And that's where those practical steps we talked about earlier come in, like remembering that everyone makes mistakes. It's about tapping into our own experiences of being forgiven and offering that same grace to others.
It's funny, when you put it that way, it makes me think about times I've been the one needing forgiveness.
Right.
I've definitely made my share of mistakes and needed people to forgive me.
And didn't feel good to be given a second chance? To know that you weren't defined by that one mistake?
It did. Thinking about it that way definitely takes some of the sting out of needing to forgive someone else. It's like remembering we're all human, you know?
Yeah,
We all mess up.
we do. And those moments of messing up don't have to define us.
Okay. But what about those situations where someone just isn't sorry for their actions? How do you even begin to forgive someone who doesn't see that they've done anything wrong?
That can be incredibly challenging. But this is where trying to understand their perspective becomes crucial. It doesn't mean condoning their behavior, but by trying to see things from their point of view, you might be able to let go of some of the anger.
So, for example, if someone is constantly late, instead of just stewing in frustration, I could try to understand why they might be having trouble being on time.
Right.
Maybe they're overscheduled or struggling with time management.
Exactly. It doesn't excuse their behavior,
Yeah.
but it can help you reframe the situation and potentially find some compassion.
You mentioned earlier that forgiveness isn't a one-time thing, that it's a process. And now I'm really starting to see how that's true.
It is a process, and it can be messy. There might be times when those feelings of anger and resentment bubble up again, even after you thought you had forgiven someone. The important thing is to keep practicing.
So what does that practice look like?
It can be different for everyone, but it could be things like journaling about your feelings, meditating, or even talking to a therapist. The key is to find what helps you process those emotions and move towards that feeling of release.
I like that. It takes the pressure off needing to achieve perfect forgiveness all at once and turns it into a journey of self-discovery.
Yes, and it's a journey that leads to a much more peaceful and fulfilling life.
I can definitely see that. This whole conversation is really making me think about my own experiences with forgiveness. Are there any other examples you can share about how unconditional forgiveness might play out in everyday life? I think that would really help to solidify this idea for me and our listeners.
You're absolutely right. Concrete examples can really bring these concepts to life. Let's say you have a friend who consistently cancels plans at the last minute.
Oh, yeah.
It's frustrating and maybe even hurtful, right?
Yeah, it definitely is.
Unconditional forgiveness in this situation doesn't mean you have to keep putting yourself in a position to be disappointed. It's about recognizing that their actions might stem from their own insecurities or anxieties.
So it's about having compassion for their struggles while still setting boundaries to protect my own needs.
Exactly. You can forgive them for their flakiness while also choosing to make plans with friends who are more reliable.
I love that. It's like you're taking your power back by making choices that honor yourself while still offering grace to the other person.
That's exactly it. It's about finding that balance between honoring your own needs and recognizing the shared humanity we all have.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. It feels like we've really gone deep into this whole concept of forgiveness. What I'm taking away from this is that forgiveness isn't about letting the other person off the hook. It's about releasing ourselves from the burden of carrying around that anger and resentment.
I think that's beautifully said. It really is about finding freedom from the negativity that holding a grudge brings.
And it's a freedom that has so many ripple effects. I can see how choosing to forgive, even unconditionally, can lead to so much more peace and even joy in our lives.
I completely agree. It's a powerful choice that can truly transform our lives.
We're going to take a quick break and come back to wrap up this deep dive with some final thoughts. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. You know, as we wrap up this deep dive into unconditional forgiveness, I can't help but think about that pencil and eraser analogy we talked about at the beginning.
It is a powerful image, isn't it?
It really is.
It reminds us that forgiveness is an ongoing process.
Kind of like how we make mistakes over and over again, but we can choose to erase them and start fresh each time.
And that
Yeah.
each time we choose to forgive, we're essentially erasing the hurt
Mhm.
and creating space for healing.
Exactly. And I think that's a really beautiful way to think about it.
It is, and it's something that we can all strive for.
You know, one thing that's been swirling around in my head is this idea of divine forgiveness.
Oh, yeah.
If we think about how limitless divine forgiveness is supposed to be, it makes me wonder about the potential of human forgiveness.
If God can forgive us for anything and everything, does that mean we have that same capacity within ourselves?
That's a fascinating question.
It is. Like maybe we're selling ourselves short when it comes to forgiveness.
Maybe.
Maybe we're more powerful than we realize.
It's possible.
What if by tapping into this idea of unconditional forgiveness, we unlock a whole new level of peace and freedom within ourselves and in the world around us?
That's a beautiful thought, and I think it's something worth exploring.
Well, I don't know about you, but this whole conversation has really been a real eye-opener for me.
Me too. It's given me a lot to think about.
I hope it's given you a lot to think about, too. Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. So keep practicing and trust in the transformative power of letting go. You never know what kind of peace and freedom you might find. And until next time, keep choosing peace over resentment.